Hello and welcome. Welcome to you all. It's good to see you all here at the end of a wet, kind of cold day. Thank you for coming to join us as we warm this place up. It's my privilege to welcome you here to Gordon College, and on behalf of Gordon College and the Center for Faith and Inquiry, my name is Paul Brink, and I am the director of CFI, although I'd be the first to say that I work with people from all over campus to put on events like this, and especially Lauren Colt from the events team. Today's lecture continues a series of CFI events that will be continuing throughout this academic year, all touching on, in some way, the theme of beauty and justice. Many of you may have attended the Fujimura event last month, in which Heijin and Mako Fujimura began to think with us about how our efforts at creating beauty and our efforts to seek justice are perhaps not so different as we might suppose. And so I'm grateful to our guest today, Wesley Vander Lugt, for his willingness to push this conversation further and perhaps push our community further as we consider this subject. Let me introduce Wes. Wesley Vander Lugt teaches theology and directs the Leighton Ford Initiative in Theology, the Arts, and Gospel Witness at Gordon Conwell, although not here in Hamilton, but rather in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Gordon Conwell also has a campus. There he's also the co-founder of Kinship Plot, which is a intentional community in Charlotte, very interesting stuff on agriculture and beauty and justice. And he's also the author of several books, including the book Beauty is Oxygen. Glad you all came so that you could breathe deeply. And Beauty is Oxygen, Finding a Faith That Breathes. And there's a table outside with copies for sale if you're interested afterwards. Wes, it is a delight to welcome you to Gordon, and we look forward to what you have to offer. Please welcome our guest.
Thank you so much. It is really a delight to be here. I am often up at the Hamilton campus, but I've never been on campus here, even though it's just a couple miles away from the seminary. So it's a real delight. And I was joking with someone, given how many people are in the room, that, man, these people must be looking for answers to how justice and beauty are related. And I don't know what I'm going to be able to provide, but this is a topic I'm really excited about. And I think we're only going to probably scratch the surface tonight, but that's okay. It's a lifelong journey of encountering beauty and justice and how they're all related. These slides working okay? No? Do I need to do something else to activate my own slides? Or switch them over? Does anybody know? Is anyone here that is tech savvy? Because I see it on my screen. I want to make sure that we are locked and loaded. I don't even know where that other slide is, the title slide. So is it connected to a different computer? Mm-hmm. Good? Yep.
You can set up the slides on the computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I have a clicker that way.
There you go. There you go. Is it on? Is the screen on? Doesn't look like it. No. There it is.
It takes a village. I work so hard on these slides that on the plane. Good to see you. All right. So maybe we could just begin by acknowledging how justice and beauty, I think, normally occupy very different places in our social imaginaries, the way that we imagine our lives together. So justice, I think, typically occupies a weighty, necessary, universal place in our social imaginaries. And I'm guessing there would be an agreement in the room that everybody needs justice. And that justice is particularly necessary for the vulnerable and the needy. So there's this acknowledgement, I think, more universally, that justice is a core element of a free and flourishing life, and is therefore something we can rally around and call each other to embrace and preserve and extend to others. Whereas beauty, poor beauty, it tends to occupy a very different space in our social imaginaries. That if we imagine justice like oxygen for a breathable and a flourishing life, we are more likely to view beauty like perfume. Like perfume, we tend to approach beauty as something to adorn our lives, believing it does little to sustain us. Beauty is what we're allowed to enjoy once we've dealt with serious things, weighty things, like justice and truth. So like perfume, we often believe beauty is subjective, it's a matter of preference, whereas justice is objective. Like perfume, beauty is a luxury for the privileged and relatively useless for the needy. It's just beauty, after all, which is one meaning of my title. So beauty is this wispy trifle compared to the life-giving force of justice. I think that's our common way of imagining justice and beauty, and I think it is absolutely mistaken, and tragically so. And it robs both justice and beauty of their power. So what I'm going to be exploring is that contrary to those very divergent and unequal places that justice and beauty have within our social imaginaries, that they are, in fact, inextricably intertwined and equally necessary for a flourishing life marked by beautiful justice and just beauty. Before getting into that further, though, I think perhaps just a few definitions might be helpful. I'm cautious about definitions. I don't even really provide one in my book because we can get bogged down there. I also think, on the one hand, an inadequate definition can really lead us off track, right? So I do like opportunities to correct inadequate definitions. But where we need to be careful, I think, is that offering a definition can often limit the reality we're trying to describe. And I deal with this all the time as just one little theologian among other theologians asking questions like, who is God? And wow, I mean, how inadequate are our words, right? To try to capture the wildness and the mystery and the uncontainability of our God. And I think something is also true with beauty. It's like English novelist and critic Samuel Butler once said, a definition is enclosing a wilderness of idea within a wall of words. But I love words too. So I still think they can be helpful, especially when we carry around careless definitions, uncritical definitions. And so beginning just with beauty, I'd like to offer this definition, the radiance of reality. Beauty is the radiance of reality, which is the overflow of the radiance of God. God is beauty, and God's beauty radiates in and through all that God creates. So every aspect of reality contains beauty, no matter how much that beauty might be tarnished or twisted in our fallen and sinful world. So everywhere we find beauty. Yes, the autumn leaves. This is way farther along in autumn than Charlotte, so I'm enjoying the reds and the orange hues. This is beautiful. But so are simple conversations and a meal together and ideas and every person sitting in this room and anyone in any place you'll ever encounter the rest of your life. Beauty is there. Beauty is everywhere. If only we had eyes to see and ears to hear, noses to smell, tongues to taste, hands to touch, minds to perceive. Beauty just permeates our lives. It shimmers through every crack. It sounds through every silence. It wafts down every street. It lingers after every sip. It exudes from every surface. And we have to shift the way we think about beauty, though, in these comprehensive ways, because we're often thinking that beauty is only in some places and not everywhere like this. But beauty is, I think, traces of divine glory that we encounter in our created world and in human culture, and it is there whether we recognize it or not. Because as the poet Christian Wyman has said, God's beauty goes belonging. Well, he says, God goes belonging to every riven thing he's made. And so I would contend God's beauty goes belonging to every riven thing God has made. So we'll say more about that in a minute. Let's get to justice related to that. I think justice can be defined as the radiance of reality, rightly ordered. Justice exists when reality and all the relationships within it are rightly ordered toward the shalom of God, toward the vibrant wholeness of God, where relationships with God and each other and ourselves in creation are beautifully and rightly ordered. So if beauty is the radiance of reality, if we're going to shorten that a little bit, then justice is the rightness of reality. And these are integrated aspects in the being and action of God. This is where we have to retrain our imaginations. God is justice, God is beauty, and God is one. And so God is beauty, God is justice, integral and integrated aspects of God and our own lives and in our own world. And for many and complicated reasons, maybe we can get to this in the Q&A later, that's not the way we often think about them, and they're at odds in our social lives and within, I think, Christian mission and discipleship. And so what I want to emphasize this afternoon is how do we bring them together? How is David's one desire undergirding and leading to the one thing God desires? What's the one thing that King David desires? That I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life and gaze on the beauty of the Lord and seek him in his temple. To dwell in the house of the Lord, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord, one thing I seek, one thing I desire. And what is the one thing God requires? According to Micah 6:8, to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. I want to propose that we would consider those as two sides of the same coin. That David's one desire and what God requires are integrated, because we will never be people who do what God requires, who act justly, until we become people who routinely gaze on God's beauty. Or to state it more positively, those who gaze routinely on God's beauty will become people who act justly according to what God requires. And I want to unpack that idea in three different ways, looking at how beauty is a gift and how that relates to acting justly, how beauty is a balm and how that relates to what God requires, and then how beauty is a prod to move us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So first, beauty is a gift, training us to operate within an economy of grace. One of the reasons I really love the metaphor beauty is oxygen. Well, one is we don't often think about beauty that way, as necessary and everywhere and a gift. But just like oxygen, beauty is just there for us to receive it. We didn't do anything to deserve it. We didn't earn beauty in some way to live in a world that is like this. Beauty is this extravagant gift that we just simply receive by being alive in the world. And I'm reminded that every time I step off my front porch into my garden. And one of the amazing things about I grew up in Minnesota, we live in North Carolina now, is you garden year-round. And right now, as the leaves are turning and falling, the garden is still vibrant with color. It's really amazing. There's the orange of the habanero peppers and the burgundy of the cowpeas. And you have the collards that are like the sea foam green right next to the mustard greens that are a brighter green. And you have so I'm stepping off my porch and like, wow, this is incredible. And there's the purple kohlrabi. I took this yesterday, right before I left. And this is right next to the profusion of red Chinese chilies. It's just so delightful. Like, it doesn't need to be this way. We don't need to have purple kohlrabi in the world. And now I realize there are scientific reasons for all these colors, and I had to look this up. That kohlrabi is purple because of the anthocyanin in its skin, and the molecular structure of anthocyanin absorbs green and yellow, and it reflects purple. Okay, I get it. But that begs the question, why is there anthocyanin? We still just take it back. Like, I get it. We can explain it on one level, but on another level, it doesn't need to be that way. It's just the overflow of the radiance of God. It's the radiance of reality. And it begs the question of why this cruciferous vegetable with purple skin would then also taste so good. And my kids think it tastes so good, which is delightful. Has that crisp and sweet, but slightly peppery. Hungry. I want some kohlrabi. So ultimately, the world is just more beautiful than we can explain. Even the best scientists are scratching their heads about why the world is so beautiful. It's just a constant gift for us to receive and enjoy. Yes, beauty can be useful. There's evolutionary reasons for beauty, and the bright purple of the kohlrabi attracts us to harvest it and eat it. But fundamentally, beauty is not a thing to be understood, to be grasped, possessed, or controlled. Beauty is a gift that defies those limits and invites us into mystery and ultimately into worship. And what happens, I think, when we pay attention, like Mary Oliver said, her rules for living, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it, right? That as we pay attention, as we allow ourselves to be astonished, tell about it, whether that beauty is expressed in kohlrabi or Caravaggio or amazing hymns of the church, whatever the case may be, it's training us to be people who are gratefully receptive, people who recognize that life is gift, and all good things come from the Father above. And those gifts are not earned, and they're not imparted to us based on some kind of abstract right that we have, that we live in a gifted world. We live in a world, as the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins says, is charged with the grandeur of God. It flames out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil. And I've had Bruce Herman's painting in the background. Some of you may have recognized it, Choate Island. which again is just a representation of how the glory of God oozes out. It's the radiance of reality. Right? And that doesn't mean everything is pleasant or nice. That's not what beauty is. Beauty can't be reduced to that. It's the radiance of reality. Sometimes that radiance is frightening. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. As Hopkins says, it oozes like oil crushed. So there's the fallenness of the world too, where beauty is tarnished, it's twisted, all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And yet, God's beauty just keeps breaking through, breaking through, breaking through. For all of this, nature is never spent, because there lives this dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Doesn't get much better than Hopkins, I don't think. So when we gaze on the beauty of the Lord, which is everywhere, even if we don't see it, when we keep encountering the undeserved and dearest freshness deep down things, we are being trained, we're being transformed into people of grace who receive gifts and give it to others. So experiencing the gift of beauty over and over again is an invitation to look around and ask, who else needs beauty? Who has been denied access to beauty? Which communities have less access? Which people, which places have less access to the radiance of reality rightly ordered? So that's the bridge to justice. Take food justice, for example, which is the radiance of reality being rightly ordered so that every person has access to the gift of healthy and beautiful food. Now, that's not to say that all healthy food has some kind of manufactured perfection, like we've come to see in our grocery stores. That's not necessarily the radiance of reality, but it's food that participates in the radiance of reality, which includes the radiance of healthy soil and the radiance of healthy places and healthy processes. And I would argue the more that you experience that yourself, the more there's this inherent drive to want to share it with others, to make that beauty available to all by planting and growing and inviting and harvesting and sharing and fasting and feasting, which are practices, I would argue, in which beauty and justice are intertwined. In his wonderful book, Exclusion and Embrace, Miroslav Volf defined justice as the social shape of grace. I love that. Justice is reality rightly and relationally ordered according to the beauty of grace. Now, I think it's important to say, not everyone, for example, with the food justice angle, not everyone who experiences beautiful food, good food, is going to naturally want to offer that to others. They're not naturally going to be oriented toward the economy of grace and securing that beauty for others. So I think experiencing and enjoying good food produces just as many gluttons as it does givers. Okay? So I want to acknowledge that, but also acknowledge what happens when beauty grips all of who you are, including your internal life and your soul. That when someone experiences the gift of beauty at every level, including the beauty of forgiveness, including the beauty of new life, then there is power in that beauty to propel you into the economy of grace. And so beauty then becomes the fuel for justice in that sense. Just another image to provide. That justice rolls down like water, like the prophet Amos says, when grace bubbles up from the spring of beauty. So many things in life, I think we would acknowledge, keep us from receiving beauty in that way. Busyness, distraction, pride, lack of attentiveness, and trauma, which leads to my second point, which is that beauty is a balm creating healed agents of restorative justice. I want to be careful here, or just acknowledge that it seems like everyone is talking about trauma these days, especially given the popularity of a book like The Body Keeps Score. And I don't want to, as a theologian, presume I am some kind of authority on the psychological dynamics of trauma. But what I do know, I think both as someone who's experienced trauma and as someone who's married to a trauma therapist who teaches me a lot, Stephanie is a licensed clinical social worker, is that truth-first approaches to dealing with trauma are not the most effective. So trauma can be so deeply ingrained in our bodies, in our minds, that talking or reasoning our way toward health is usually not enough. So nor is merely adopting a new set of practices or skills. So a goodness-first approach or a truth-first approach are not adequate. We need a beauty-first approach to address trauma that frees those who are traumatized from prisons of ugliness and transform them into people of resilience and healing, which can then be extended to others. And trauma is incredibly complex, but one of the ways of understanding trauma is in terms of the ugly stories that we inhabit and embody because of painful, horrific experiences, right? In other words, trauma is not just the bad things that happened to me in the past. It's what lives with me, right? And the ugliness and the pain that permeates my body now, not just things in the past. So trauma is a matter of having our minds and bodies and lives wrapped around and distorted by horror and ugliness, which is why we need a beauty-first treatment plan, I think. And one scholar I found incredibly helpful and insightful on this, his name is Timothy Patitsas. He's professor of ethics at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School, just outside of Boston. He has this book, The Ethics of Beauty, where he explains that in trauma, we find our lives organized around an experience of ugliness, the opposite of the beauty given to us in our relationship with God. In other words, trauma cuts us off from the epiphanies of God's beauty that keeps us healthy and fully alive and resilient. And it's really important to note that encountering beauty is not some kind of cure-all for trauma. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But what I appreciate about the insight of Patitsas in this book and other places is he shows how beauty needs to be there for holistic healing and the ability to act justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with God as well. That yes, medicine can and should unlock our brains from debilitating conditions, but what draws us into healthy attachments? Beauty does. Yeah. Analytical modes of therapy can help dismantle false narratives and nurture new ones, but it's beauty that awakens new desires and loves. So he goes on to say that the healing of the soul begins with noticing God's many theophanies and falling in love with them. In other words, it begins with eros for beauty. In renewing our love for authentic beauty, we are slowly cleansed of the ugly images of trauma and the false images of worldly pleasures. Our character, unraveled by what we have experienced, begins to be knit together and become whole again. We begin to be created again. And so interesting. In the book, it's a long book, but it's written in dialogue format, which is really, really neat, kind of Socratic. He talks a lot about liturgy and how liturgy is the proper way to be healed and to get ready for urban planning or to be ready for whatever the case may be. And he talks a lot about liturgy and trauma as well, and made me think at the first weekend of my sabbatical, we attended worship at St. Nectarius Greek Orthodox Church in Charlotte, and reminded me of this point of Petitsos, that worship is ultimately about glorifying God, but it's also the primary site where we get to encounter the beauty of God in word, in sacrament, in stone and paint and prayers and songs and relationships. So we have David's one desire. I want to gaze on the beauty of the Lord in the temple. That's connected to the life we really need and want. And now the Orthodox tradition, I think, is particularly strong with this emphasis on beauty. But this is available to any of us. And even in my little simple Presbyterian church in Charlotte, here we are gathering around on Christmas Eve with our candles. There is beauty there. There's one thing I seek, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord in the temple. Because this is one of the ways that God makes me new, that I get to have the vision of the world that I really need, and that can heal the wounds, to remember the gospel, to see the gospel, to hear the gospel, to feel the gospel, to taste the gospel, right? All the ways that beauty comes to us, to become a healed agent of restorative justice in a broken world. Let me say just a word about that. Why restorative justice? Well, because those who have been freed from the prison of trauma, those who are being healed by beauty, would never want to perpetuate the cycles of harm. And retributive justice, which is, I know I'm vastly oversimplifying these things, essentially punishing wrong in ways that match the harm, might seem like reality rightly ordered to some, and there are some instances where that's necessary, but I would argue it is not the most powerful form of justice that flows from gazing on the beauty of the Lord. It isn't the radiance of reality rightly ordered. It's restorative justice, I believe, that is the kind of justice that rolls down like water when grace bubbles up from the spring of beauty. Because restorative justice is the kind of justice we receive from God, who does not punish us according to what we deserve or repay us according to our iniquities, but gives us grace upon grace. For as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. So restorative justice is trauma-informed because it aims to repair vicious cycles of harm and trauma, but I love restorative justice because it is beauty-informed as well, because it's the kind of justice we receive and give when we gaze on and are transformed by the beauty and the glory of God in Christ, who is the new temple of God. Okay, so the final point I want to make then is that beauty is a prod. I was grasping for words here, but you'll see what I'm trying to say there, to move us, to activate us to enact the radiant justice of God. But before we can act justly, we need to have a vision for what justice is. And that's true for any practice or pursuit, right? If I want to be a good friend, I need to have some vision for what good friendship is. If I'm going to be a good citizen, I better have a vision for the common good and for political order. So similarly, in order to act justly, we need to have a robust vision of justice, of radiant reality, rightly ordered. And for Christians, that vision of justice comes from God himself, from the promised future of God, which includes every relationship in all of creation being rightly and beautifully ordered. This is our vision of heaven, that new heavens and new earth, where we are right with God and we are right with each other, and we are right with ourselves, and we're right with creation, and that is harmonious and beautiful. It's right relationship with God in worship. It's right relationship with each other in love. It's right relationship with all of creation in companionship and in mutuality. And I've learned a lot from Sam Wells, he's currently vicar of St. Martin in the Fields, right on Trafalgar Square in London. He was chapel of Duke University for a while. He was the external advisor on my PhD, which is where I got to know him in a very intimidating environment. And I have since gotten to know him as a friend and a pastor theologian. He has a great little trilogy of books that he's written as a reflection on Micah 6:8. So he has Act Justly as a book, Love Mercy as a book, Walk Humbly as a book. And in Act Justly, he says that a vision for true justice includes the consummation of creation, in which violence, rivalry, and privation give way to effervescent abundance and rewarding companionship. There's another definition of beauty for you. Effervescent abundance. I like that one. So he's saying only when we are able to imagine true justice, consummation of creation, effervescent abundance, rewarding companionship, will we be able to act justly in the here and now. That's why he says that justice begins in the imagination. And the Christian imagination is one set on fire by the miracle of grace. And this is one of the reasons why the beauty of the arts is so powerful. Because the arts enable us to imagine not only the way things are, which is an important thing that the arts do, helping us grapple with reality, but also the way things could be, or the way things even will be. So the beauty of the arts can show us how, help us grapple with injustice in the way things are, which is important. But I think even more important is the ability of the arts to help us envision reality as it could be, or as it will be as promised by God, true justice, the radiance of reality where all relationships are put right, especially in ways we would least expect. So the arts can surprise us by giving us visions we weren't looking for, that we weren't planning on. And I love thinking about Jesus's parables along these lines. No one was thinking about hearing about the kingdom of God in these ways, but Jesus says, imagine that the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. Dwell on that for a while. Imagine that the kingdom of God is like yeast, like a hidden treasure, like a net, like a banquet with the most unlikely people, right? That through the beauty of his storytelling, through the beauty of these parables, Jesus invites us to imagine God's kingdom and justice in radically new ways. To imagine a radiant reality rightly ordered where the first are last and the last are first. And what's such a gift about the beauty of art is that while some art gives us a clear vision for justice, and that's a part of the intention of it, there is a sense in which all art of all kinds, and I'm saying, visual art, music, whatever, any kind of artistry, can contribute to the kind of hope and courage and vision we need to act justly in the world. And what I mean by that is even when an artist is not intentionally intending to communicate anything about justice or anything about hope, that the very act of making something new challenges the way things are. Okay? So a work of art will present us with new combinations of colors, right? New mixtures of sounds, new sequences of words, new amalgamations of movements. And by doing so, the beauty of that artistic presentation is testimony to the possibility of newness. Newness no matter what, in all circumstances, amid the old. So art reminds us that injustice is not inevitable and can become, through the very practice of art making, a living witness against ultimate tragedy. And this is something that Mako, who you've heard from recently, speaks of in his book, Culture Care. Mako Fujimura writes that even those who are still considering Jesus' claims We'll find a grounding for justice work in the cultivation of beauty. An encounter with beauty can show us what could be and can make us rightly dissatisfied with the way things are. So, beauty in any form, whether in art or in creation, I would argue, reminds us that not all is lost. God is indeed making all things new. And that includes us, too. Not only remaking our lives, but making all things new through us, through our creativity, through our artistry, through our vocations, that we can remember that there remains a dearest freshness, deep down things, and through our artistry, we get to bring it to the surface. And we can contribute to that in our very acts of creativity and justice. So beauty is a prod moving us to enact the radiant justice of God. I had a few more comments, but I think what I want to do is end with a poem. Hold on one second. Okay. Is that up there again? Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, just so we have plenty of time for interaction and Q&A. I love the poetry of Czesław Miłosz. Just an incredible poet, Polish-American poet. And it's a long poem, so I'm just going to read the end of it for you to give us lots to consider. Always good to let the poets have the last word, by the way. So in the beginning, he's talking about how our sense of right and wrong, we have this inherent sense of right and wrong, but also with beauty, and actually beauty is more powerful. So that's why I want you to hear from One More Day. The same could be said of beauty. It shouldn't exist. There's not only no reason for it, but an argument against. Yet, undoubtedly, it is, and is different from ugliness. The voices of birds outside the window when they greet the morning, and iridescent stripes of light blazing on the floor, or the horizon with a wavy line where the peach-colored sky and the dark blue mountain meet, or the architecture of a tree, the slimness of a column crowned with green. All that, hasn't it been invoked for centuries as mystery, which in one instant will be suddenly revealed? And the old artist thinks that all his life he's only trained his hands. One more day, and he will enter the core as one enters a flower. And though the good is weak, beauty is very strong. Non-being sprawls. Everywhere it turns into ash, whole expanses of being, and it masquerades in shapes and colors that imitate existence, and no one would know it if they did not know that it was ugly. And so when people cease to believe that there is good and evil, only beauty will call to them and save them so that they will still know how to say, this is true and this is false.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, especially for that final poem. That is wonderful. We have time for questions. So I saw lots of people scribbling in their journals and their books. I would love to hear these questions expressed. So whether your question is about art or justice or beauty or vegetables or whatever, bring it forward, especially how these things relate to each other. And Wes, I'll let you handle your own questions. And yeah, just let me say we're looking for questions, not small speeches. So offer it clearly and directly, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Great.
All right, let's have at it. Who wants to go first? It's always been intimidating. In the back? Got a microphone for you.
Oftentimes the understanding of beauty can vary greatly across cultures,
Mhm.
especially in, between cultures of different religions even. Is there a unifying factor or a specific aspect of, the prod of beauty to spur towards justice that you would say is the most cross-culturally appealing?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a wonderful book called Six Names for Beauty that tracks 6 words for beauty in 6 different cultures. And so you get the more of the Japanese concept of beauty that emerges out of suffering that Mako's talked about. And yeah, so it's a wonderful question, and certainly different cultures have different angles on it. I think all of those cultures, there is this commonality of beauty being what at some point takes your breath away. And it's the pop of reality that it could be, and it's not certainly not what we often think of beauty as. Oh, isn't that nice? That's not universal about the experience of beauty. But yeah, it's what hits us in a deeper part of who we are that we can't explain, but we want to respond to. Up here in front, and then over there as well. Mm-hmm.
So, sorry. You said that experiences with beauty can create just as many gluttons as givers, and like the difference between that is letting beauty actively change our innermost being. Is there an active way we can allow that to happen, or is it more of something that just is from beauty, like we can't avoid it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and speaks to the mystery of how God works. I think it's a very dynamic thing, right? This interplay between the movement of God in the world and the Spirit of God who's on the move constantly. Spirit, the biblical words for spirit being wind, ruach in the Old Testament, pneuma in the New Testament. So everyone has access to beauty, but often has not allowed beauty in. Right, so only God can give breath to these dry bones, right? And that's not always an instantaneous thing. They're like, well, I was not receptive to beauty, and now I am. so I hesitate to give a pattern, but as a theologian, I want to insist that this is God's work, and we collaborate with God's work. I hesitate to use the word co-creation because I think it can be misunderstood at times, but there needs to be an active reception of beauty, not only that's out there that I can appreciate, but that transforms me from the inside out, which is the essence of the beauty of the gospel, of course. But there needs to be a deep trust in God's work and the ability to receptively collaborate with what God is doing. Okay, and was it over here as well? Yeah.
So you kind of expanded the definition of beauty, but how do you think about the opposite? Since you've used a couple words like ugly and such, but how do you think of that as more than just a visual? Since you expanded beauty beyond a visual, how do you expand ugly?
I could go all Augustinian on it and say it's just wherever beauty's not, right? But I mean, there is a sense, and that's correct, I think. Ugliness is the privation, the lack of beauty, but also involves kind of the active twisting of the radiance of reality away from its proper direction. So, and that's where ugliness and evil, they're evil twins, because there's examples, we were talking about this over lunch, where this combination of colors represents something beautiful. This combination of colors, and with a swastika in the middle, represents something horrible, right? So it's taking the good structure of how colors can be combined, and it's twisting that direction so it serves an evil purpose. And so the ugliness becomes the radiance of reality not rightly ordered. And radiance understood in a sinister way, in that sense, because it can be very compelling for people, but it's moving them in the wrong way. Yeah. More to say. There's a really great book. I'm going to not get the title right, but it's something about the beauty of ugliness and beauty and ugliness in modern art, or whatever. It's a wonderful treatment of that topic, and some good theological insights in there as well.
Sometimes when I'm talking with like a friend and they're inviting me into an area of their life that might be ugly or might be struggling with. Sometimes I struggle, like I see beauty in the situation, but I struggle to describe it to them or to like help. How would you try and invite somebody else in to seeing beauty that you are seeing in their life and talk to them about it?
Are you willing to give any more specifics? I mean, because I think some of that involves some situational wisdom, and because beauty is meant to be experienced together, but also, yeah, there is power in being able to explain. But do you just want to elaborate just a little bit more, if you're comfortable doing so?
Yeah. For example, like someone that I'm very close with, I could say, like my family member, my brother, for example, who has his own various struggles that he has within our family dynamic. And yet, there are many things about our family dynamic that are very beautiful. And there are many things that we have been able to bond over, that he and I have these shared experiences, I suppose. But sometimes I struggle I know it's not my job to convince him of that, but to even put words to describe beauty in that sense and to try to paint the picture of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why art exists, right? So we have all these experiences of beauty. It's like, did you see that? Did you hear that? Do you realize that? And art comes from that, being able to share that with others. Yeah, I mean, sometimes there has to be an acceptance of like beauty may be out there, but we're not going to all have the same experience of it. But I think the most important thing is just to invite people along to try to, if you're experiencing something as beautiful that they may not be experiencing, to invite someone into that experience, and even just to acknowledge, like, I think we maybe have pretty different experience of this or way of describing it, but would you let me, share a little bit more from my experience? Or maybe you'll write a poem about it, or maybe you'll write a song about it, because I do think sometimes expressing our encounters with beautiful things with more beauty is the best response.
Hi, over here.
Oh, great.
Oh, I don't know if this is on, but so you talked a bit about restorative justice and the Samuel Wells quote, "The Christian imagination is one set on fire by the miracle of grace." And I was just wondering if you have a specific example, maybe in your own life, something you've experienced or seen of how by the grace and power of the Holy Spirit, you've seen the Christian imagination kind of lighting up to bring beauty through restorative justice or bring restorative justice. I don't know if you know what I'm getting at, but have you seen that at work in a particular example maybe?
Yeah, if I could just talk a little bit about kinship plot. Paul mentioned a bit about this intentional community that my wife and I founded, and the idea of kinship plot is that there is power in life together, and doing that in unexpected combinations, doing that as oddkin and not as people you would expect to be together. And I think one of the most powerful things for me is seeing, so we work with some women particularly who are returning from prison and finding their place in society. So we are welcoming them. I mean, it could be different kinds of people as well. Say, come, let's eat together, come, let's participate in these rhythms. To then see these people then continuing to extend that welcome and to be leaders in the community who are exponentially increasing that hospitality and welcome is kind of how I see that explosion of grace. Like a beautiful thing happens, someone experiences justice in some way. That is then, that beauty and justice are so linked there, in the power of encounter and the power of imagining what's possible, that I've just seen that continue to ripple, 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 ripple. It's really awesome. Yeah. Okay, in the back.
I'm thinking about certain like things that you've said, and I feel like one thing that I find myself like a conversation I get into with my Christian friends that I don't ever get into with my non-Christian friends. Like, I personally see so much beauty in like secular works of art and like reflections of beauty, like movies and music, not made like from a Christian perspective. And I was just wondering, like, if you have experiences like seeing that beauty as well, and if you have, like, how would you go about explaining that, finding that beauty in like non-sacred things to people who are skeptical, like Christians who are skeptical? That makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And it's complicated because if we're thinking of the transcendentals, beauty, truth, and goodness, I think anyone who's religious and is valuing all of these transcendentals, but Christians in particular, it's hard for us to recognize beauty where we see falsehood or where we see evil, right? And so I think it's just acknowledging that, to say, this form is beautiful and it's compelling. May not be true, may not be, good and pointing us toward the good, but I think anyone is capable, of course, because we're all made in God's image. We all have access to beauty. We're all created to reproduce beauty. And what happens when beauty, truth, and goodness are integrated is a miracle of grace. And we shouldn't expect to see that miracle of grace everywhere. But beauty can still be acknowledged for what it is, and kind of paired with this longing to bring it closer to truth and goodness. Okay, here and there and everywhere.
Hey, Wes. I'm wondering about, like, could you share a historical example of either a movement of justice or an act of justice that was fueled by beauty, and what was the beauty that fueled it?
The civil rights movement and gospel music. And, just thinking about even just the power of repetition in choruses. I was reading something the other day about, there's different perspectives on if our worship music and stuff should be repetitive. But in a context where you have been pounded down by injustice, that repetition is joyful resistance. And you're singing your way, you're moving your way with beauty to a different kind of hope and a different kind of spirit. So, songs like "We Overcome" did for those generations, I think, what other kinds of forms of art are doing for people around the world today. Mm-hmm. Okay, we had one back here and a couple back here as well. So up to you. I don't know who's first. Should we go over here first? Okay.
So one question I was wondering is of when we are like looking about and thinking about like this beauty and what you've spoke to today. One thing is that I feel like it's gonna be a couple days that will pass by, and we're going to eventually forget a lot of things. So like, what is one way, in a sense, where we can like actively find beauty, or an exercise that we can do when we get up in the morning to remind ourselves of what God's beauty is?
I love that question. Very practical. And yeah, I speak about this a little bit in the book, but something that I discovered during COVID, actually, the pandemic, was the practice of breath prayer. And for me, I'm very like task-oriented and achievement-oriented. So it's easy for me to rush through my day without attentiveness. But breath prayer, where on the inhale, I'm addressing God in some way, and on the exhale, sometimes it's just open my eyes, right? And so I've been adopting breath prayer at various transitions in my day. So if I'm moving from one meeting to the next, I'll just take literally 30 seconds, do 3 breath prayers. And usually it's, God, make me attentive to the beauty in this meeting that I don't want to be in, right? And that, I'm sure there will be things that I don't enjoy, but without exception, really, it has always made me a little more attentive to the beauty that might be there. So yeah, that could be before a class, it could be before a meeting, it could be before anything. And just that moment to pause, to have that little Sabbath moment in your life, to be grounded in the presence of God and whatever beauty might be right before you that you might be missing. Okay, let's go over here.
I just had a question. I'd love to hear you speak to, you were just talking about gospel music and that sort of thing. I guess I'm curious about how you think about things that are beautiful that express lamentation.
Mm-hmm.
So the Psalms or Job or the blues or, things along those lines.
Yep.
How do you you were talking a little earlier just about an expansive notion
Yeah.
of beauty that's more than prettiness.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of think about that sort of carrying content that's disturbing but true?
Yeah. It's so good. And that gives me opportunity to connect it to my Christology as well, which I didn't have time to talk about. It was one of those comments I skipped. Probably should never skip Christology, but don't tell Dr. Sundquist. No. Yeah, so I think if Christ is the form of beauty, is the ultimate revelation of the radiance of reality, then we see that beauty, our expansive notion of beauty includes whatever role suffering might play in our life now, the inevitability of death in this life. And so the ability to honestly identify with reality as it is now is a part of how I think God helps us to encounter the beauty of Christ. Because that's not a beauty that we would naturally choose, right? And the prophets say so, like, this isn't the Messiah you think it's going to be, both in this sort of surface understanding of beauty as well as the form of a life. It's not what we would expect. And so I think lament and other aspects are about being able to express the fullness of how God encounters us and the hope we have at the same time in the mix and muddle of life in the here and now. Okay, we'll just go to the other side of the room. I know there was one more over here, blue shirt, yep.
I'm just curious, especially as a theologian and just having mentioned your Christology, to what degree do you believe the definitions of beauty and justice as concepts are tied to an informed ecclesiology, especially in the ontological sense?
Do you want to explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Sure.
Just so we're on the same page? I mean, I do, but...
Yeah, so like some of your definitions of beauty, specifically as the radiance of reality and justice as the right ordering of that.
Yep.
From my perspective, are a little bit maybe broad, and so I think that it can be understood, although not meant to be grasped or
Sure.
Pulled down to ourselves. But I think beauty is a supernatural thing, something above nature, above reality itself, right? And that's informed by my ecclesiology, being a Catholic and believing that the church is an apostolic thing that has an authority to define what beauty is. You mentioned like your Greek Orthodox friends, the liturgy, the use of like bells and incense and icons and those things as the church's way of bringing the human mind a little bit higher than just what is the common grace and the common beauty that we all get to experience in nature. And so from my perspective, I think that the definition of beauty and justice is going to be pretty intimately tied to what we believe the church is, because that it also informs who we believe Christ is and what we believe about beauty itself. So I think that this question of beauty and justice can maybe come down to a question of Christology before anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That was a good further explanation. Love that. Yeah, and Christology and ecclesiology are deeply connected, obviously. And I think why that's so relevant to the discussion of beauty is, okay, here we have Christ is the ultimate revelation of God. He's the form of beauty. Christ is broken and risen and ascended. So is his church. right? So we're not, when we, I think in our ecclesiology, we need to not expect perfection, because that's not the kind of beauty that's on offer now. And the now and not yet of, this is the body of Christ now, this is who God is making us to be. And I think the same goes to, in terms of just like the resources and the context of a church. I mean, there is deep beauty in simplicity, and a sort of, as well as like a maximal aesthetic as well. So you have all these different church traditions that I think, and different expressions of worship and different buildings and different practices that just speak to different elements of the beauty that can't be contained into one style or limited to either simplicity or extravagance. Although I will always push my Protestant brothers and sisters, say maybe there could be a bit more. If we're so used to stripping things down, and there's reason for that, we could experiment with some aesthetic muchness in our lives. Okay, other middle or in the back or over here? Yeah.
Hi. I was thinking about just like being a person who looks for beauty in things. And I was reminded about this Elizabeth Elliot quote that says, "If your goal is purity of heart, be prepared to be thought very odd." And I was wondering if you've ever encountered that, if ever, like, as a person who looks for beauty and thinks about beauty a lot in your everyday life, like, if you've ever encountered a situation in which you're like, okay, I'm kind of weird, but like this is still important. But
Yeah.
if that's also just part of being a Christian too, is being a little bit weird. So I was wondering how you've encountered that in your life and how you think about that in your profession. And
Yeah, for sure. I love that. There's different ways I could respond to that, but kind of what's rising up now is just how children are the example for us. And, Jesus saying you need to become like children. And part of that is an unfiltered ability to be wowed by anything. I shared the story in the book, but my son, who's now 9, when I was writing, was 7, was on a mission to catalog every species of beetle on our lot in Charlotte. Way more than I thought there would be. But every time he found a new species of beetle, like, he'd come running to me. He's like, Dad, look at this one. It has purple spots or whatever. And, as an adult, I feel like we're just trying to be like, okay, yeah, whatever. Meh, But like, he genuinely thought this was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, So, and there's that capacity. And, children sometimes literally get that beat out of them, right? But can be just such an incredibly beautiful model for us of that. Pay attention, be astonished. Like, take that step. It's not enough to pay attention, because we can pay attention to lots of things and be totally unfazed. So I pray that we can become more like children. Right here, in the middle. Sure.
Obviously, there's so much suffering in the world today and so much war and pain. Where do you see places where beauty could be used for means of restorative justice today where it's not current?
Yeah, I've thought about going more down that angle with the second point. I think there are so many examples where attentiveness to beauty is often the last thing we think about for people who are in various situations of privation or need. But I thought of my time, particularly in a community, a very under-resourced community in Mexico City, where there was this practice of when we were kind of canvassing the neighborhood that was built up around Jalapa in Mexico City, which is the city's garbage dump. And people were being incredibly resourceful, like building their own homes out of garbage and things like that, just incredibly creative. But we're just canvassing the neighborhood, trying to get a sense for the need. Like, how can we collaborate together for justice in this place? And every single house we went to, they're like, just wait 30 minutes. And in 30 minutes, they had somehow baked a cake for us. You know what I mean? Because there's a sense of wanting to welcome, but also like we want to make something beautiful right now for you, because there may not be a tomorrow. So there's that, but also like we just want to celebrate relationship. So I often think about, even in thinking about humanitarian aid, and how do we meet basic needs while also acknowledging full humanity of our neighbors, to provide things, and they could be very small, that would provide more dignity and more beauty, that give like genuine hope to people as well. It's just harder to think about how to fund that and meet the basic needs, right? But it's always something that I dream about.
Maybe one more question from someone.
Okay. There's one over there.
Oh.
Okay.
So you've kind of addressed this with a few questions, but I'm just wondering if you could maybe dive a little deeper in how, if we can, restore beauty when we find beauty really strongly communicating lies. Like as Christians, we know like this is just directly against everything we believe. Like you mentioned the swastika, but maybe even, I don't know if you've heard of a piece called, it's called Piss Christ, and have you heard of it? It's like this, honestly, it's a really beautiful piece, but then you find out like it's actually just this like plastic image in a bottle of pee, and it's actually like potentially a really terrible message. So like that's just one example, but how can we as Christians really like respond to these things that are just really beautiful visually, but then speaking such lies?
Yeah. And that's a complicated one, given the Catholic faith of that artist. And in some interviews, I'm not the authority on that piece or that discussion, but it seems that also, in addition to shock art, which is its own tradition, right, that there was some desire there to help people grapple with the earthiness of the incarnation, that Jesus peed like all of us do. So I'm not saying that that's the right way to read the work. I'm just saying sometimes, even when something is shocking to our sensibilities of what beauty is, there is an opportunity to see, to ask questions or to interact with the piece or the expression, to what is the desire under the desire of this, and is it merely shock art, or is there something more there, and how might we as Christians express that same desire, but in a more fitting way, a more fitting form? Like, are we really unleashing our imaginations to help people be shocked by the foolishness of the gospel and the radical nature of the incarnation? Like, how tame are some of the Christian presentations of the God who became flesh, right? So it's more like, okay, the intention is probably not pure, but what can we learn? And how can we do better with the fullness of all of our creative gifts? And so trying to have that like critical reception, but also appreciation where it's fitting. Thank you. Is that it? Okay.
Well, thank you, Wes. And let me thank all of you as well for your attention and for your excellent questions. There will be time to maybe try to catch them you ask your own individual question. There's also books for sale over there, and also Wes will be signing books if that's something you're interested in. Let me also say that 2 weeks from today is our next CFI event. We will be hosting poet and pastor Abigail Carroll, who will be reading poetry and talking about her work, still on this theme of justice and beauty. So the conversation shall continue. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of today and as we move towards the weekend. Thank you so much.